Today I'm gonna go through my 5-star reads of 2022. I know it's already like February, but I do love watching other people's 5-star reads, and I think it's a great way to find new books that maybe you want to read. I have 11 books on my list. Overall in 2022 I read 80 books. Considering the fact that I gave 11 of these books 5 stars, I think I can consider 2022 a very good reading year for me. Some of these are like more 5-star reads than others, but I think that's normal. So let's begin. The first book that I gave 5 stars to in 2022 was If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha. This is a book about 4 South Korean women who in some way are connected to each other. They're all very, very different. So one of them is a room salon girl who gets paid to entertain wealthy businessmen. Then one is an artist, one is a hairstylist who's also obsessed with K-pop, and one of them is a pregnant lady. This book deals with social hierarchies and also beauty standards and like the plastic surgery scene in South Korea. But overall, what made me give this book 5 stars was the female friendships in this book. Because I mean, this book is all about females, and I don't know, like when I finished this book, I closed it and I was like, that was such a good ending. I think what like made the book for me were the actual female connections here. All of these chapters are in a different POV, and I thoroughly enjoyed the writing style and the female friendships in this book. Or even if it's not female friendships, it's just the female connections, and I mean, who doesn't love friendships and female connections? Then I feel like everyone, their mom, their dog, their hamster has read this book, and it's The 7 Husbands by Evelyn Hugo. It's by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So I read some other Taylor Jenkins Reid books in 2022, but this was the only 5-star read for me. The others I didn't really enjoy that much, but I will unpack that at a later date. But this book was so good. I feel like so many people have read this book and also have talked about this book, so I'm gonna make it very short. In conclusion, the book follows Evelyn Hugo, who was a Hollywood star in the 50s, and she married 7 times, and there's this journalist who gets to interview her, and Evelyn Hugo tells her story. What I also really enjoyed about this book is that it included like a newspaper, articles. It feels like really real, but it was a good read. I had a good time reading it. I also cried. I was on a plane reading this and I was crying, and the person sitting next to me actually asked the flight attendant to bring over some tissues, and then they gave the tissues to me and were like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I'm fine. It's this book. It's good." I highly recommend this, and it's an easy read. I cannot also wait to see the movie. Even though I feel like this should have been a series because it's 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, but it's okay. Then moving on, we have The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. This is a classic, and I understand completely why this is a classic. I mean, I read this book in March and I still haven't stopped thinking about this. And Sylvia Plath's writing it went into my heart, and it has just like stayed there. It's just a special book for me. This book takes place in the 1950s. There's this girl who gets an internship at the New York fashion magazine, and then she just starts to spiral. She has depression. She just doesn't see the point in anything anymore. You can just see her spiral until she tries to take her own life. I don't know, I just felt like I could understand why the protagonist, what's her name, Esther, doesn't really see any meaning in this world anymore, and it was just, I don't know, it was heart-wrenching, and it was so sad. I went into this book not really knowing what the outcome would be. I've read about Sylvia Plath before, and I've heard about her tragic life. This book is also inspired by Sylvia Plath's life, so maybe that also added another layer to my reading experience. I highly recommend this, and I understand why it's a classic. and I have underlined so many lines from this book, and I feel like someday I want to reread this. Then, moving on, we have Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is a Japanese bestseller, Japanese fiction, magical realism. So the basis of this book is that there is a cafe in Tokyo where you can travel back in time and talk to a loved one or whoever and have one final conversation with them. However, there are some nuances to when you can travel back in time and so on. But yeah, the premise of the book is that you can travel back in time. There are 4 stories here, so it's husband and wife, then it's a couple, then it's sisters, and then it's mother and child. It was just a very comforting read, even though it was about having to say goodbye to people and losing someone and coming to terms with it, but then being able to go back in time and maybe fix some things, but then you have to ask yourself, like, what do I want to fix? Something about Japanese fiction I just adore. And this book was good. It was not good, it was excellent in my opinion. Some existential questions, a bit of existential thread, some magical realism, bittersweet conversations. This book has it all. The next book is also Japanese fiction. It's Convener Woman by Sayaka Murata. I started reading this and then 4 hours later I closed the book because I had finished it. And the writing style, it was such an easy read. Thoroughly also enjoyed the message of this book because the main character here is 36 years old, right? And she doesn't have a boyfriend, she just works in a convenience store. Other people in her life are questioning why doesn't she have a family, why isn't she married, why is she still working at the convenience store. Then some things happen, she does some stuff, but at the end of the day it reminds you that if you're happy in your life, then you shouldn't really listen to what other people are saying and thinking that you should do in your life, because I mean you're the one living your life. I think it's a great reminder that everyone's different, everyone's happiness looks different, and it's also very easy to feel like you need to do what other people are telling you to do even though you're not happy doing those things. And yeah, I mean it's your own life and you should live it the way you want to live it. And this is a great reminder for that. Okay, the next book I read is called Cursed Bunny by Bora Chung, and it's a South Korean short story collection. It's the most disgusting and vile book I've ever read in my life. However, it's genius. Some of the short stories here, I was genuinely so disgusted. I went into this book not really knowing what the short stories were about, but let me tell you, they are all very different and peculiar. The book for me was shocking, but I just couldn't put it down. Some of the pages in this book are not attached to the spine of the book anymore because I was gripping and holding on to dear life while I was reading this, but I thoroughly recommend this. But also please check the trigger warnings. I feel like for any of these books, like for example especially the bell jar, check the trigger warnings prior to reading. But overall, it was genius, it was peculiar, it was disgusting, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it was like nothing I've ever read before. I mean, while this book was like kind of very disgusting and shocking, it also deals with problems and addresses the patriarchy, also criticizes capitalism in modern society. Some of the stories were horrifying, but at the same time, lots to think about. I think that the next book is my favorite 5-star read. Maybe it's the 5-star read for me, and that is If Cats Disappeared from the World by Genki Kawamura. Another Japanese fiction book. Are we surprised? Not really. So there's this guy who finds out that he's gonna die soon. The doctors are like, look, sorry, you don't have much time left on Earth, and he goes home. And obviously the guy who's waiting for him at home is the devil. And he's like, look, I know you don't have long to live, but let's make a deal. I will make something disappear every single day, and then I will let you live one day more. The guy who's about to die is like, yes, obviously I will make this deal, because that sounds great. So the guy chooses something and the devil makes it disappear and he gets to live another day. And then we just follow him through his days, the way he, I guess, analyzes life, and he also looks back on his life and what he regrets, and he finds certain people that he lost contact with for various reasons, and he has conversations, and it was just, I don't know, something about this book just spoke to me. I also really did love the concept of the devil. So the devil told the guy that like, oh, I'm everything that you're not. So the devil that I usually think of is the one in Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. And this devil was completely different, and I kind of also loved him. I mean, the devil in Masha and Margarita is my favorite character. I think just something about him. Also, the Masha and Margarita, I think, is one of my favorite books. It's just, there's something about it. But also this devil, I thoroughly enjoyed. And there are actually 2 parts in this book that I always come back to, and I will read you those 2 paragraphs and then we'll move on. So this says, love has to end, that's all. And even though everyone knows it, they still fall in love. I guess it's the same with life. We all know it has to end someday, but even so, we act as if we're going to live forever. Like life is beautiful because it has to end. Just something about that paragraph. And another paragraph that I come back to a lot. When I buy a new book, I read the last page first. That way, in case I die before I finish, I know how it ends. So says Billy Crystal in When Harry Met Sally. Standing there, looking at the shelves, just made it impossible to ignore the fact that I was going to die before I had the chance to see them all. I couldn't help but think of all the movies I hadn't seen, all the meals I hadn't eaten, and all the music I hadn't heard. When you think about it, it's the future you will never get to see that you regret missing the most when you die. I realize it's strange to use the word regret about things that haven't happened yet, but I couldn't help thinking something along the lines of, if only I would be alive. It's a strange idea, although really, when it comes down to it, none of these things matter. In the end, like all the movies I was about to make disappear completely. Yeah, this book just, it moved me, and it's heartbreaking, it's bittersweet, but at the same time, I don't know why, but I felt very reassured once I had read this book. And it was very comforting to read this. The next book that I gave 5 stars to is called My Pen is the Wing of a Bird, new fiction by Afghan women. This is a short story collection written by women who live in Afghanistan. This book was so heartbreaking because all of these short stories are about family, work, like childhood, friendship, but in the background of all of these stories is war. Constant bombings and constant talk about one's security. And it really just made all of these short stories so heartbreaking, because I feel like at the end of the day, all humans kind of value similar things like family and security, and these people in these stories and in real life do not have the security that is just a basic human right. And they're not free to do whatever they want because of this conflict going on in the background. And maybe this short story collection also really stood out to me because of the conflict that's going on in Ukraine. Because I mean, I live in Estonia, I see Ukrainian flags every single day, I hear about Ukraine in the news every single evening or whenever I watch the news. And I also see Ukrainians in my hometown and I hear Ukrainian language, and it's just a constant reminder that it just a reality for so many people. I feel like in a few years' time, the short stories from Ukraine will have the same background setting as this. And I think it's such an important book because the way that media shapes our views of certain nations and certain conflicts going on. But at the end of the day, the people who are living in these situations are just human beings. And this book also is giving a voice to those who are silenced, and it's giving them a chance to share their own work and art. And I highly recommend everyone to read this. My Pen is the Wing of a Bird. The next book that I gave 5 stars to in 2022 is called Notes on Grief by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And this book is just short essays about the author's experience after, like her experience and emotions after her dad passed away. And I think I connected with this book because I also lost 2 of my closest loved ones last year, and it just, I think this book describes grief very well. I mean, everyone grieves differently. The last essay, that's number 30, just hit very close to home, to be honest. Everyone is going to experience losing someone at some point in their lives. I'm not saying that it's a nice thing to read, because grieving and death overall aren't nice, but I think it might comfort some people. Okay, and the last 2 books, I don't have the physical copies, but the first one is a short story by Ursula K. Le Guin, and it's called The Ones Who Walk Away from Olympus. I mean, to be honest, the initial or first reason why I decided to read it was because in the music video, Spring Day by BTS. Oh my god, I just realized I have my BTS calendar from 2022 December on my wall. Okay, whatever. Anyway, yes, so there's this music video, Spring Day by BTS, and in there's this house and it says Omelus on top of it. And I was like, what is this? Like, what's the meaning of this? Let me Google. And then I found that there's this short story called The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelus. And I read it. It's a classic. And it was a very good short story. The premise of the story is that there's this place where everyone lives happily, and I mean, the whole place is very prosperous. And then you, at a certain age, find out why it is the way it is, and then you can make a choice. You either stay at the place knowing what's happening somewhere outside, or you walk away. I mean, it's a very philosophical short story. It's also a very great short story for referencing in essays. So I study politics and communications, or international relations and communications, and this short story has helped me out, and I just recommend reading it because it does make you ponder. And also, like, if you're part of the army, if you also like BTS, then read it. It also adds depth to the Spring Day music video. Yeah. And the last book is for... Okay, I don't know how many Estonians are watching this, but it's by Jaan Kaplinski, and it's called Vimo Bike. This book hasn't been translated into English. I don't think it ever will be, but this is just a collection of his works, and he talks about religion and language, and these are actually like his lectures from this podcast called Ülikool, which I also highly recommend listening to. And at the beginning of this book, there's also a letter exchange with Tõnu Õnnepalu, who's also another famous Estonian author. Unfortunately, Jaan Kaplinski is no longer with us, but he was an Estonian poet and writer and philosopher, and also a culture critic. And some of his books have been translated into English. The one that I can think of from the top of my head is The Same River. I feel like The Wandering Border is also, yeah, I think, yeah, that's his work, right? Anyway, so some of his books have been translated into English if you're interested in Estonian literature. But yeah, that book, I felt like I was meditating while I was reading it. So I highly recommend also reading it if you haven't already. And yeah, those were all of the books that I rated 5 stars. I would say I had a pretty good reading year, and I'm excited to read more books this year. My TBR is never ending, so... But these were some of my faves from last year. I hope you enjoyed this video. Go read the book. Also let me know what were your 5-star reads from 2022. I do love watching what other people are reading and also what books they're buying. Thank you for watching, and I will hopefully see you soon. Bye!